South Windsor. I've been here for 28 years, which is hard to believe, and for the last 5 years I've had the privilege of serving as chief. I want to acknowledge a number of the members of our department that were able to be here tonight. I encourage them to come. It's difficult to have a dialogue between the police and the community if all the police don't show up, so I appreciate the fact that they're all here, and I think it's important for them to hear what's said, and at the same time they may have some contributions as we move through the evening. So we talk about these traffic stop statistics, and you may have seen some of these statistics published in the paper, and there's certainly been a lot of talk about them. So I want to put them in context. I want to share some of those statistics and some other numbers with you. I understand that statistics aren't always exciting. I don't think we really know what all of the statistics we read about mean. That's what we hope the Institute is going to work on, interpreting some of this data so that we can get a true message. Perhaps it needs to go into some sociological realm so they can figure out what the data means as far as behavior of police officers. But tonight our goal is to, one, have a courageous conversation, and that is to talk about a subject that is very delicate and can be very uncomfortable for communities to open up and talk about. But we recognize that there is a question about the behavior because we have 17.2% of the drivers stopped in South Windsor during the study period were black drivers. And so that immediately raises the question, 17.2%, that doesn't reflect any demographic breakout in South Windsor, so why is the number 17.2%? I don't know the answer to that, but we're going to look at that number in context with some other numbers and maybe start to frame some sort of position that these statistics take. So here are some general demographics that are put out by CERC, which is a well-known published set of statistics. We have the South Windsor and the state of Connecticut. So you can see South Windsor has 25,577 people. 83% of the community is identified as white, 4.7% is identified as black, 7.9% Asian Pacific, 0.1% Native American, and 5.3% Hispanic. And you can see how that relates to the statewide statistics. Now, a lot of what I talk about here, I talk about white and I talk about black, and I don't do the breakdown for every other race, and I don't do Hispanic. The reason for that is when we're talking about the traffic stops, the emphasis seems to have been on, are you picking out white drivers, are you picking out black drivers? Because black and white are very easy to tell apart. As you move into some other races, it's not as easy, not as obvious. There doesn't seem to be as big a focus on other races being pulled over disparately from white drivers. So these are the basic demographics for the town. The traffic stop data, this is a small one, but what I wanted to do here is these are the communities whose traffic stop percentage, or the percentage of black drivers, exceeds the statewide, I don't want to say average because it's not an average, but statewide of all the drivers stopped during that survey period, which was a 7-month period, October to May 2013, 2014. These are all the communities that were above the statewide 14% average. So when the traffic stop data report is published, it was actually published back in September, when it's released along with some more analysis in the coming weeks, we expect these communities to be highlighted as those who are above the 14% number statewide. So South Windsor is right here at 17.2%, and you can see a lot of our neighbors are here. You see East Hartford, Hartford, Manchester, Bloomfield, Windsor, Vernon is on here. So all around this area it seems as though there's a higher percentage of black drivers that are stopped as opposed to white drivers. So this is where South Windsor sits at 17.2. You've got 14.6% here, all the way up to the high of 55.9% in Bloomfield. So we take those numbers and now put them in perspective a little bit. You know, one of the things that we talk about when we talk about the gathering of these traffic stop numbers and why they don't reflect your community is, well, obviously we know that the people who drive in our community aren't just South Windsor residents. There are some who probably wish we could make that rule. You can only drive here if you live in South Windsor, right? That's not the way it is. Our streets are public streets. We have Route 5, which connects a number of communities, north and south. We have Buckland Road, which brings people to a couple of hot spots, which is Evergreen Walk in the Buckland Mall retail area. Sullivan Avenue, which acts as part of that thoroughfare. So we have some roads that are very heavily traveled by people from throughout the region. not just South Windsor area residents. And so we looked at those numbers specifically. We looked at Route 5. So on Route 5, all of these statistics are during that study period, okay, which was October to May, 2013, 2014, so that 7-month period. So on Route 5, there were 604 cars stopped, and of those 604, 50% were white, 27% were black. And of the total stopped, 18.2% were Hispanic. On Sullivan Avenue, 309 cars were stopped for that entire period. 76% were white, and 10% were black. And on Buckland Road, 384 cars were stopped, and 69%, almost 70% were white, and 14% were black. So you can see here, Route 5 accounts for a lot of the drivers that are stopped that are black. Is that because the population of drivers on Route 5 is different than the demographic for South Windsor? I would say that the pool of drivers demographically is probably much different than the numbers for the entire town of South Windsor. So when you take these thoroughfares, interestingly enough, I think if you take Route 5 out of the whole traffic stop matrix, we drop down below that 14% number for the state. But again, I'm not drawing any conclusions out of this. I'm just saying that when we look at the numbers and you look at them in context, we have to think about the demographics of the actual drivers on the road. And we really don't have yet a true way to measure that, short of somebody being out there with a counter, which is what a lot of the chiefs are advocating for, to do some true live sampling so we can get a statistically relevant sample of drivers and say, look, every 5th driver is black, or every 3rd driver, or every 10th driver. That's what we really need, is someone who's out there and can count who's truly driving on the road, I think, to really put these numbers in perspective. So when Ms. Hughes was talking about the traffic stops, this is the notice that we have to give to drivers. And if you've been pulled over in the last year, you don't have to raise your hand. You should have been handed one of these notices. Whether you get a warning, a verbal warning, a written warning, or an infraction, you should get one of these notices. They're not huge, but nonetheless, it's a notice that tells you for instructions on filing a complaint, if you believe you've been stopped, detained, or subject to search solely based on your race, ethnicity, ancestry, age, gender, sexual orientation, religion, or membership in a protected class, or to file a commendation, please contact the police agency of the officer who stopped you, or the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, the CHRO. So this is the notice that's given out. Because when they looked at all of last year and they saw that there were only 9 complaints made, they started to wonder, and they looked at previous years, and they said, well, maybe people don't know how to make a complaint. So maybe we should take that affirmative step when we stop somebody, to hand them a notice to say, if you're displeased with this traffic stop, call the local police chief, or if you think you were stopped because of your membership in a protected class, then notify the CHRO, and they'll conduct an appropriate investigation. So that's what the statute says we have to do, and that's what police officers across the state should be doing when they stop a car, anytime they stop a car at a traffic stop. So that's what the notice looks like. So as a law enforcement leader, what I take away from this critique of the statistics is that perhaps there are those that think these statistics indicate our officers are doing something wrong. And I don't know if that's truly what folks are saying. If they're saying that because these numbers seem to be unexplainable and they're disproportionate when related to your demographics, are they saying that the officers are doing something wrong? So I, as a police chief, am supposed to analyze these numbers for each officer and try to see if there are some trends, if there are some anomalies, if there are some situations where officers are stopping minorities in a disproportionate amount, or in disproportionate amounts. So here are 4 officers. These are 4 real officers, no names attached. But during that traffic stop period of October to May 2014, you can see Officer 1 stopped 183 cars. 144 were white, 34 were black. That doesn't sound like a terrible ratio. But when you look at it from a percentage standpoint, that's 18% of those drivers are black. Officer 2 stopped 281 cars during the study period. 249 of them were white, and 27 of them were black, 10%. Officer 3, 221, cars stopped, 162 white and 42 black. That's 19% of the stops for that officer. Officer 4 stopped 476 cars during that period of time. 75% were white, 22% were black. So now, as the executive officer of the police department, I look at this, and what does it tell me? Well, there's more questions, right? Where did this officer work? Why did she have so many, this happens to be a female officer, why does she have so many more stops than anybody else? Where did she work? Did she work on Route 5? Did she work on Buckland Road? What district was she in? District 3, District 2, District 1. District 1 is Route 5. District 2 is a good chunk of Sullivan Avenue and Buckland Road, and District 3 is the neighborhoods. So I now have to look even farther to find out if this is problematic. But I don't know if 22%, if her stopping 22% black is an indication of a problem or not. I don't know. And what I don't want people to think is I don't want people to walk away from these statistics that we're reporting and that are going to be reported statewide and think that the people who were stopped weren't actually committing motor vehicle violations. Nobody is saying that. The people were stopped for a reason. They were stopped because they committed a motor vehicle violation, and they either got a written warning, they either got a citation, or they got a misdemeanor summons, or they were arrested because once the officer became involved, maybe they found they were subject of a warrant, or they found some other evidence of a crime. So I get and other chiefs get very hesitant when they start to analyze the statistics, because we don't want people to walk away from that. Again, perception is everything. Thinking that the statistics are saying the officers are wrong. The statistics are saying that they are stopping people for no reason at all. People are being stopped for legitimate reasons. The question that's being asked is, why are the numbers not reflective of some published demographic for the area, whether it's the estimated driving population or the population for the county or the population for your community. So now as a chief, am I supposed to say to this officer, and now look, you're dealing with very small numbers here, 105 out of 476. Am I supposed to say, you know what, next month, if you could stop 10 fewer minority drivers, that would make your numbers look better? I hear people chuckle. That would be is that what I'm supposed to do? Say, officer, you really? So how else are you going to get those numbers to change? So I don't know if the overall goal of this whole data collection is to get these numbers to change and be more reflective of the demographics, or if it's to just get us to realize that there seems to be some disproportion to the numbers and have conversations like this, help people understand what the statistics mean, help us all understand what they mean, and start to build some trust in the community. But I wanted, because as a police leader, this is what I have to do. This is what it comes down to me, is each individual officer. And how do I deal with them? Am I telling them they're doing something wrong? Am I saying, oh, you need some kind of training? I don't know, because I know all of these officers, and they all do a great job, and they stop cars when the cars are wrong, and they don't care what color the driver is, and they take the appropriate enforcement action. I truly don't believe that we practice bias-based policing here in South Windsor. So that's why we ask, okay, you've given us these numbers, but what do they mean, and what's our next step? So these are what they look like when you break down to individual officers. So I took the statistics and I said, well, that's interesting. We know what the traffic stop statistics are. In that total time period, we stopped 1,500 drivers, and 17.2% of them were black, 7% were Hispanic. Those are the published statistics that are going to come out in the report. So I looked at some other activities that we were engaged in where we recorded the race of the people involved. So for all of the traffic citations we issued, and we issued 1,022 of them, again, during that same study period, 143 of those citations went to black drivers, so that's just under 14%. Now this is an interesting number. Accidents. We have when it comes to accidents, unless we're running people off the road, we have no way of controlling who the drivers are involved in accidents. So I looked at all of our accidents for that period of time. There were 307 traffic accidents, 39 of them were black drivers. That's 12.7%. Where are they coming from? They're not in any of that. 12.7% isn't part of our demographic. So is someone going to say the police are responsible for that? we have no control over that. So I thought that was an interesting number. We happen to collect the race and ethnicity, or the race of the people that are involved in all incidents, so not every police department can come up with that statistic, but 12.7% of the drivers involved in accidents were black. All of our incidents for that period of time, this includes everything from medical calls to service calls to criminal incidents, there were 2,610. And of those, 390 of the people involved in these incidents were black. That's 14.9%. I looked at our medical assist calls. Of the 63 we had, 4 people were black. That's 6.3%. Of all the criminal arrests that we had, there was 410 of them. 82 were identified as black. That's 20%. I looked at some other numbers. Our pistol permit applicants, which is generally reflective of our actual population, because you have to be a resident of town. 5.3% of those applicants were black. And then I looked at all of the names that we have in our record system, what we call our master name index, all the names that we've had. And we've had this system about 14 years. We have 88,170 names in that index. And of those, 9.6% of the people identify as black. And then I looked at the master name index for just residents. We could filter out who's a resident and who's not. And 5.5%. And that's pretty close to our published demographic. Where our published demographic, I think, was like 4.7% black population. So it's interesting that in our master name index, of all the people we've ever had contact with, for any reason, we always take your name, date of birth, right? We record that information, it goes in our system. Although Mr. McGuire from the ACLU may not like that. Where is he? He may. 5.5% are residents. So what does this say? I don't know what it says, but what I'm showing here is that we have an occurrence of contact with people other than white residents or white people in the community this percentage of time, which doesn't really reflect any of our published demographics. It's almost random. So, the study is just focusing on traffic stops, and I think it kind of doesn't give you a true picture of the people we have contact with on a regular basis. That's all. That's my point in showing you those numbers. So then, this is my last one with numbers. We talked about use of force. This is a big issue right now. So, since 2005, up until 2014, we had occasion to use force 44 times. Our officers engaged in conduct that resulted in us filing a use of force report, which means they either had to physically restrain to a greater extent other than just holding somebody back. In other words, they had to wrestle with somebody, and they had to deploy some sort of a weapon system in order to regain control of somebody or keep control of them. 44 on 44 occasions, 2005 to 2014. So of the subjects of those uses of force, 32 were white males, 72%. 5 were black males, 11.3%. 6 were white females, 13.6%, and 1 black female. Of all the times we've used force. And then I looked at our taser deployments, because we now have to keep track of how often we use the taser and who we use it on and collect all the demographics. So we've deployed the taser 27 times in those 9 years. And in those occasions, 85% were white male. So if you didn't know the number was 2, you'd say, well, 7.4% of the time it was a black male. Boy, that's a lot. Well, no, that's 2. That's 2 out of 27. 2 out of 27 were white females, 7.4%, and no black females. So that's our breakdown of use of force for the last 9 years. What I didn't put on here was the total calls for service. So from 2005 to 2014, I remember this off the top of my head because it's a huge number, 363,000 calls for service that we responded to. 363,000 calls for service, and 44 times we had to use force. It's a lot. It's a lot of calls for service. It's not a lot of use of force. I attribute that to the tact and the skill and the professionalism of our police officers, because they're able to oftentimes talk themselves out of a situation without having to deploy any level of force. Tiny Hughes talked about the Racial Profiling Prohibition Project. Connecticut's police chiefs are very much a part of this. Here in South Windsor, we're very much a part of this. CTPR3.org. It's a conglomeration of all sorts of organizations. These are the big ones: ACLU, CHRO, The Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy, that's who Ken Barone represents out of Central Connecticut State University. Mike Lawler in OPM, the Office of Policy and Management. He's the Undersecretary for Criminal Justice. These are all folks that are involved in the Connecticut Racial Profiling Prohibition Project. So that's the last of my slides. I give that to you because I wanted you to see the numbers and see what they look like in context, so you can perhaps draw your own conclusions. We're now going to ask our panel to come back up, and we're going to give each panelist an opportunity to talk very briefly about their involvement in perhaps the racial profiling project, or some of their involvement when it comes to representing folks who feel as though they have been mistreated by the police, or feel as though they're being followed and stalked by the police, or whatever the situation may be. And then we'll have an opportunity for some questions and answers. You can talk to me, you can talk to Mr. McGuire, you can talk to Mr. Wright, and we can talk about some of these perceptions and some of the issues that perhaps these statistics raise. So the panel wants to head back over to your seat.
Do you have that as a handout, please?
You don't have it as a handout tonight, no, I'm sorry. But I can certainly get you a copy if you'd like.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, how are we doing?
So we've heard from Tanya Hughes from the CHRO. I'll turn the mic over to David McGuire. Dave McGuire is a staff attorney with the ACLU here in Connecticut. Does a lot of advocating for the Bill of Rights before our Connecticut General Assembly, and has been a strong advocate for kind of keeping the reins on Connecticut law enforcement. David.
Thanks, James. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. The fact that Chief Reed has convened this group is a great sign. He's someone that's a leader, he's forward-thinking, he's progressive. He's gotten ahead of all of this, and I give him a lot of credit for doing that. He's always someone that we can call and have a dialogue with, which unfortunately is not the case with all law enforcement in Connecticut. I've been with the ACLU about 8 years now, and this has been an issue, like Tanya said, that's really come to prominence in the last probably 3 or 4 years. To be honest, the first few years I was at the ACLU, I did not know about the Alvin 10 Act. And I don't think a lot of citizens did either, and that's because police in Connecticut, by and large, were not complying with the data collection. The state's attorney, who was charged with coming up with a data collection form, never did so. And it really, whatever little data that was reported in all different forms, and it was kept in a box and really not looked at in any meaningful way. Due to the work and perseverance of several people, including my former boss, Sandy Staub, there was a real movement for the past 3 or 4 years to get this moving. And the stats that the chief just showed you are the early results of that. Like the chief said, it all comes down to perception. Ultimately these numbers can help police show that they're being fair, but ultimately what the police need to do in Connecticut is get the trust of the community back. Every time there's an unfortunate incident like the Michael Brown incident, or the Eric Garner incident, or an unfortunate taser incident that's caught on video in Connecticut, it makes it more difficult for police that are doing their jobs, like most of the people in this room, to do their jobs and keep us safe. So it's on us as the public to be open-minded to ask questions, and it's on law enforcement to answer those questions honestly. Some of the stats, and I'm not going to get into the numbers because the chief did a really good job of showing those variables. Out of that report that the chief referenced, African Americans and Latinos are twice as likely to have their vehicles searched in Connecticut during that time period. That's an alarming number, but what's even more alarming is that they're much less likely to have contraband than their white counterparts. So when white people are stopped less frequently, they're much more likely to have something illegal found in that search. So that is a very telling statistic for us, and we're looking forward to the report that Ken Barone and the folks at Central are putting out and working on, because again, it will help the conversation continue. This is something where there's not an answer. I don't think any group is telling the police to do something or not to do something. It's just to be fair and think about it and continue doing these bias police trainings. We all have bias that we deal with. And